Tattum Reading correlates with Orton Gillingham. When I was a youth, just learning the program, I was somewhat fanatic. And I found that Orton Gillingham was the basis of really programs that work with kids with dyslexia. So I went and learned 4 of them. I started with Slingerland. I went to the Green Book, which is the basic old approach. I became an expert in alphabetic phonics and taught that as a trainer for a good 10 years. And then I also picked up the Wilson a bit, did some work with that, and a little bit of Project Read. So very much background. What became clear to me as I worked with kids is that, and the study showed, it took about 2 years to get 2 years growth. And I found by deleting some aspects, I was making faster growth. And one of the aspects that really helped me was the work by Liberman on the idea that kids need the segment, blend, and delete words, manipulate sounds and words. And that was one of the key underlying concepts. And then I heard a program called LIPS, which is for kids that have auditory problems, is dealing with the very thing. So I took the LIPS program and saw that I could do what was dealing in the flashcards, which the flashcards bores kids to death. I found when watching with LIPS, if I just reviewed the sounds quickly on a magnetic board, they didn't have a magnetic board, that was my idea, but with movable letters, having them say it, I'd say it and point to it, and then use them in syllable work, doing the phonemic deletion, the segmenting, blending, the phonemic deletion, like fit, make it fet, make it thet, make it chet. I was actually using the consonants and vowels and didn't need to do the drill cards. The second thing is I also didn't need to do what are called the linkages, where you had to tie the letter down through 8 linkages, visuals by tracing and saying it and writing it. That would take 8 to 10 minutes, and you'd go letter at a time. I found actually I could check all the sounds the child could do, cut off their sounds, clean up their vowels. And with most kids, clean off their consonants, teams, vowels, and get them in a book day 1. By the way, Shaywitz's latest book, and she is the expert, says that you want to have a push, not a pull. She says a lot of the books and programs have a pull. The reading's boring, drab, and they're just reading word lists. But what you want is a push, where you're pushing kids by having more exciting reading. That was something I discovered actually long before her book in the late 80s and early 90s. And that's what resulted in my writing 100 books, different series for different level kids that they get excited about and helped push the reading. So the difference is I maintain the scope and sequence of Orton Gillingham, pretty much the same. I've changed how the information is reinforced. And I'm following more the information processing model and the processing model where I'll clean up the sounds real quick. Like I said, some kids, I give them credit for everything they know. Some kids, I'll give them credit for consonants and teams and vowels. And if they've had Orton before, our family, diphthongs, and put them in a higher level book. Because I then can take the sounds they have trouble with and using my system of saying the sound, pointing the sound, and then doing syllable work, they learn it that way without having to go back and do all the drill. So basically, in summary, scope and sequence is the same. The work, the order of the sounds definitely is the same. It's the presentation and the reinforcement where I change. I present them. If I have a child having difficulties, I use movements to help with the sounds, but I do a quick daily review of sounds, quick daily review of pointing. It's really in the syllable work that the sounds are reinforced. And then I have books that are phonetically controlled and that are actually the kids really enjoy, that really are I think the big difference, because you can move from phonics to any level, even if you're just starting, into a book that's meaningful to the kids. So in reality, I look at us as 21st century Orton. We have the scope and sequence, the ideas of Orton, the idea of having closed syllable, short vowels, have a book for it, then move to a higher level, have a book for it. But rather than dealing with the sounds and letters through more of the tracing and copying mode, I'm using now the processing mode that we know that kids need to segment, blend, and manipulate sounds and words. And that's really what changes processing.
Can you talk to a little bit about attaching reading to the process of learning to read to actually reading? So you have a series of books that are all phonemically aligned to your courses. Like you created that because that was partly a missing, the books were boring, they weren't
Yeah.
decodable. Like, so what else? There's another reason I think you attach the reading. What is that?
Well, number one, I made a book with 4 consonants and 1 vowel. My whole point was to get kids reading day one, get them involved day one. By the way, Shaywitt's book, again, the recent one, also talks about you need to get kids reading as soon as possible. So she's really starting to push the idea of take this code and get it and get involved in books right off the bat. But what became clear to me is the books were so boring, the poll, the kids didn't have any interest in reading, even if they could read it. So I wrote all the books for a couple reasons. One was if I had a 7th grader, it wasn't fair to have them read traditional phonics books, which were boring. I wanted to write an adventure series that still followed the sequence, the Orton sequence. And so I have a closed syllable book called The Fog. I have a VCCV, a breaking a syllable book called The Ghost Ship. I have an open closed silent E book, called French Quarter Phantom, but they're exciting books. And I did that at different levels. I wrote it. So the books were a couple things. One is to get kids reading immediately with something that was meaningful. And then 2, apply whatever they know with advanced knowledge appropriate for their age.
I wonder if you would tell me a little bit about, like, I've noticed in your program that you have it broken down to 6 or 7 parts. And that seems to be a deliberate attempt to create an experiential cycle around the major components of what we know teaches kids to read.
Right.
Can you describe how your lesson plan is broken up?
Well, yeah, the whole point is many of these kids have attention deficit. Kids with dyslexia will often have some attention issues. So part of it is to change brain centers. So I start by saying the sounds, which is primarily auditory, reinforced by kinesthetic. Then I point, which is visual, reinforced with kinesthetic. So I'm changing brains. Then I do the new concept, which is conceptual, full brain. And then I go the syllables, fit, make it flit. Now that's really involved. That's involved the whole auditory area. And also some prefrontal, you got to be thinking about that whole process. Flit, make it flat, make it flast, make it flatch. You got to be aware that that's a larger piece, TCH. So you're using the auditory, whole auditory, but also some frontal lobe. And then I get into quickly making words, nonsense words, which is using visual, the visual part of the brain, with the auditory, the speaking. And then from there, I'll go to spelling, which is now involving auditory, frontal lobe, and writing. And then the reading, which is total conceptual, and it integrates the entire brain. It involves visualization, thought, sounding out in the entire brain. And then you have writing, which is kinesthetic and cognitive. So the idea was to change brain centers to keep the interest, and also to reinforce the program using a phonemic approach rather than a drawing or writing approach. So quick sounds, new concept, then apply the sounds in syllable work to help the sounds stay rather than doing flashcards. I would do that. So there was a couple of reasons for the plan.
You also have fluency thrown in there too, correct?
Well, fluency is part of the reading process, yeah. You start with getting them decode and then decode faster, and then you move into fluency, right?
Great. Is there anything else about if I were a parent looking at reading programs and I came across a good Orton program and said, why would you come to a Tattum-based reading program or learn-up centers versus a strong Orton program?
Well, first,
at the end of the day, what's the difference?
Yeah. I'm of course an Orton fan. I've been an Orton fan since the 70s, and it was part of my upbringing. And if you have a child in kindergarten, first grade, or second grade, I think they can move at a similar pace with us, at least first grade, kindergarten. It's just that we move much quicker than Orton. Orton's a great developmental program, but we move much quicker and we have more motivating books. And I think that's one of the key things. I think I would just simply tell the parent that, the program moves quicker. You got a 4th grader. I have this reading series for 4th graders. Look at it. It's not like you're used to. and it's gonna take this many hours to get your child reading around fourth grade at this speed. And so we're no longer talking 2 years for 2 years growth. We're talking hopefully 80 hours, 80 to 100 max, hopefully.
And talk about that for a second, because when we first met, you told me that you were going to estimate reading, getting to reading goals for students, and that you would be able to say if they're at this entry point in the program, or what you call a start, that we could estimate when we could get them out of their reading goals, that which are typically decoding above grade level, fluency that's maybe a little bit slower, but here we are going to outline the goals. And I was like, no one else is doing that. It's like it's novel, I think, correct?
Yeah, sure.
How can you do that?
Experience. I've been doing this 50 years. I started at age 6, keep that in mind. But I've been doing this whole
Looking
thing.
good for a 25-year-old.
Yeah, that's right. I was did this for 50 years. So I have experience. See, all this stuff I'm doing is out of experience. If my experience did not match with what I was doing, I started looking at what I was doing and if there are better ways. So I just started getting the idea of how long it took based on starts. You got a child who knows nothing and is young, we can't really put a set time on it. But start twos, who know one syllable words, we generally have an idea. Or if you're ready for 2 syllable words, we have an idea. Or if you have a good background and you've done Orton already, we have a real great idea how fast we can go. By the way, the students I love to teach most are those who have an Orton background, because I know they know their consonants teams, their vowels, they know the R family, they know diphthongs, and they know what I call the green walkers. 2 vowels go walking, first does the talking. There's about 7, 8 of those. They know those. And so I can put them in a higher book. I can give them credit for all the sounds they know, and we're off and running in what I call start 4. So, and we're primarily working with them on reading fluency and spelling fluency.
There's something else that you talk about a lot that I wanted you to address for a second. You talk about this thing called the word form area.
Right.
And I think it's one of the things that's unique to your program. I don't think very many reading programs talk about how a kid with dyslexia becomes fluent, or how a kid with dyslexia picks up what are frequently called sight words, which are the memorization of words, which actually isn't what we know now is neurologically happening. Can you talk about that a little bit, though?
Sure. You have an area, a gyri called the fusiform gyri, which is behind the ear. Okay. And it's a visual component that correlates with the auditory components of the brain. And the auditory components stimulate it. So when you are dealing with sounds, you start with Broca, and when you're dealing with the language or vocabulary that you're kind of knocking up, you're connecting to Wernicke's area, and these two work together. As they work together, they send messages to fusiform gyrus, or the word form area. And after a period of time, it starts to fire. Shaywitz noted that with many kids, it was the last 3 or 4 months of first grade. And these were kids who didn't have reading problems. These are regular kids. And once it fires, you're in the game, because you're now, when you read a word once to 4 times, some thought it was 4. It seems to be going lower because of how many vocab words kids are getting now. So let's say after a couple times, you're remembering the word for reading and spelling. What a gift. Okay. But meanwhile, our kids who are struggling with hearing the sounds and words and connecting with the language area, they're having trouble. They're not firing this word form area. And so they're not picking up these spelling words. And working a lot of sight words is not the answer for that. You got to work a lot of this processing to fire that word form area. Once that fires, they then take off. And with some kids, they may not fire it. So they'll read, but they'll be slow and methodical. So they may read 80 words a minute and be really detailed and good readers, but they just won't be real fluent. They'll pick up some sight words over a period of time. There's a lot of adults I know like this, pick up some sight words, but they just haven't really innervated. The word form area is not really firing. Shaywitz did find, if you do intense work in a phonics program, that it does fire. And she was looking at classes over a year. We're doing one-to-one tutoring, so I believe it can. I've seen it happen in a faster basis. So to me, one of the things I get across is make sure you're doing the program, make sure you're doing the syllable work, the processing and all that, because we want to try to fire that word form area.
So, if you were a parent and someone said to you, let's do a sight word program, you'd be like, it's a waste of time if your kid has dyslexia. If you don't know that your kid has dyslexia, it's still not a great use of your time to do a sight word program. Is that correct?
Well, you got programs like the one in the Australia and New Zealand recovery, a reading recovery, which is a sight word program. And if you have a kid who can read and has the word formulary firing, it can be effective. We found that in the school I work with. But if you didn't, it was totally ineffective. If you had phonics lessons, there's other programs in the country that primarily focus on visualizing sight words, and it works well with kids whose word formulary is firing. But if you're have dyslexia, or you are having really problems with sounding out words, it doesn't do you any good. And I've seen it. I've had programs with a couple hundred hours of sight word come to me, and they're still at my beginning starts. Whereas when I've had programs that did systematic phonics and they come to me, most of them are in my higher starts. So for kids with dyslexia. So
in summary, can you give me in 3 sentences how you're able to teach everything Orton does in 20 or in 60 to 80 hours rather than 2 years?
Okay, number one is I group things together. Like I said, with most of my kids that are entering at 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, I clean up all the consonants in a day, the short vowels, and I get them, and I then reinforce it in a book. Now, usually in Orton, they do a sound a day, and then they do a blend a day, and then they may do a word family. So we're talking months to get to where first day I'm cleaning up the consonants, teams, and vowels. And people say, well, that'll never stick. Well, it does, because of the syllable work we do. You know, blit, make it blat, make it plat, make it plash, make it. That is what makes it practical and makes it an immediate application in spelling and the textbook. So one is the cutting down of what are called the linkages and doing that in another way is the first major thing. The second is the books. The books change the game. Our program is totally a push rather than pulling a kid along. The books push them along. They like the books. And that's really a big deal. And then I think third is the work on fluency that we do. And in fluency, we're working on speed of saying sounds, speed of saying syllables, speed of breaking words down, repeated readings where they do repeated and beat the clock. And we do timed readings, and we teach phrasing and double phrasing. Now, some phonics programs do that, and some don't do that as much, but that's another. So I think it's the cut back on the all the linkages and the sound and doing more in large groups. The books definitely push it. And then 3 is we move pretty quickly because of how we're approaching fluency and things that we do.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Steve.
Sure.
Do you have any questions for me?
For you? Why do we exist?
Well, there's the universe, you know.
Good. Well,
I did want to say, I mean, and you cut this off, George, wherever you want to when this has happened, when you see this, but I do feel like other programs compartmentalize reading into, we're doing the sounds, we're doing a phonemic awareness, now we're doing structured word, now we're doing spelling, now we're doing writing, now we're doing comprehension.
Right.
And they seem to be cut up into different program parts. So I learned spelling, and then I learned comprehension, and I learned all these things, and they're separate, and then they're put together when a teacher is teaching a book. Mm-hmm. And where I feel like your program's super strong is that all those things are wrapped up into an experiential cycle in each lesson plan. So each day I do the sounds and I review the sounds. Each day I do the reading of sounds, the spelling of sounds, and I keep repeating it every day until they're mastered. So I don't wait for a kid to be mastered in any one program. I'm constantly reviewing. So I know that they don't do the Y very well. I'm going to go back and review that sound more than I am other sounds that they've already got.
Actually, when you ask for the 3 major points, I would actually put the starts as number 3 and fluency as number 4. because the starts is what makes us dramatically different than anyone else. And that's just my experience teaching at schools. I mean, I find I'd have a phonics group that was like a lower start, more phonics. Then I get kids who come in who were higher, that had just needed a few sounds. And I did directed reading where we taught at the syllable level. And then I had whole language kids who could read, who needed to deal with thought, writing, and high level reading. And so I would train 3 different groups. So it was from working with that when I just basically transferred that to the phonics, where if we have a child who knows nothing, he's a start 1 and we have books for it. If he's at 1 syllable, he's a start 2. But we'll have kids ready for multi-syllables and they're ready for 2-syllable words. Well, we give them credit for everything they know and start them there. But we'll have a start 4 who's had a lot of work and comes to our program, and a lot of programs would start him over and we start him right where he's at. That's the big difference. So a start 4, we will give him credit for everything he knows. We'll put him in a book that's challenging and we're off and running. And then some kids we don't teach phonics to, that start 5, they're comprehension. So the starts are the other huge difference that we have. Now, talented Orton Gillingham teachers will transcend the basic program and adjust it as needed. They'll use the basic program, but they know how to adjust it for various kids. And I've seen that with really talented Orton Gillingham specialists. The best was Diana King out east. And she's just taken Orton in all kinds of directions. Great writing, reading, etc. And she's amazing. And Ailey Cox also has done a lot of that from Texas. So, yeah, I think that's what really makes the difference, is the starts.
Thanks, Steve.